All right, awesome. Well, nice to meet all of you. My name is Lynn Pernil. I'm based here in Hopewell Junction. I own a luxury wedding photography and video business. I specialize mostly in weddings, proposals, and events. I'm one of those very rare few people, at least for now, who found their passion very early on in life. I actually fell in love with photography at my high school photo club, and I got my first professional DSLR in 2007. And I've basically been in love with photography ever since, and this has been basically my whole career. Every job I've ever had has been photography related. But when I first got started, I actually was mostly interested in fashion and beauty and portraiture photography. So when I went to Montclair State University, majored in photography, minored in business, and in my sophomore year, I interned at Allure magazine and Harper's Bazaar magazine. So I got to get a little taste of what the fashion photography industry was like. But then everything kind of changed in 2011 when I shot my first wedding. Something just clicked and I realized this is what I wanted to niche down on. I realized that wedding photography combined basically every aspect of photography I've ever loved. So obviously on a wedding day, there's a really big photojournalistic aspect. So you always want to be ready to capture all the tears, all the sentimental moments, and all the candid, fun moments, all of the energy, all of the excitement. There's also a really big still life component. So now that I'm a bride myself, I'm actually engaged now. I realize just how much, thank you. I realize just how much attention and time goes into picking out all of your details. And a lot of the details on a wedding day also tend to be handmade or maybe like a family heirloom. So it's really important to capture every detail that you see on a wedding day. So even things like the watch, the shoes, the rings, the invitation suite, jewelry, and also any decor that's there, so centerpieces, the cake, any type of stationery, any table settings. And ironically enough, there also is a really big fashion and beauty component. If you think about it, your ultimate goal is to make the bride or groom feel like they could be models on the cover of a magazine. So a lot of the things that I learned in my fashion and beauty days came in really handy in my wedding career. So things like how to pose the couple, how to compose your shots, how to show the subjects in the most flattering light, how to interact with the subjects, and how to make them feel comfortable in front of the camera and bring out their personalities. So 2 years later, I was 100% sure this is what I wanted to do with my life. So I officially started my LLC, created my wedding business. And since then, I've been shooting weddings for 11 years now. I've shot over 200 weddings. As of last weekend, I think I hit 231. So I've seen basically every culture, every religion, every season, size, color scheme. I've seen probably every type of wedding that there is out there. And that's actually my favorite part about my job, is that every wedding is different from the next. I love seeing how the different couples bring their personalities and their backgrounds into their wedding day. In addition to weddings, I also shoot surprise proposals. So basically, I'm like camped out before they arrive, ready to capture the moment. And then I also shoot all the events that come before the wedding day, so things like bridal showers. A lot of Southeast Asian weddings have lots of cultural events that happen leading up to the wedding, so things like the Mendi, Dulki, Sangeet, events like that. And then I also shoot all other kinds of events, so things like bar and bat mitzvahs, sweet 16s, and quinceañeras. And then I also still do a bit of portraiture, usually for past wedding couples, so things like newborn photos, maternity photos, and family portraits. And then I also include an engagement session with all of my wedding packages. Most couples don't have a lot of experience being in front of the camera leading up to their wedding day. So it's a great opportunity for them to get a little more practice being in front of the camera and for all of us to get to know each other. And then also the couple gets nice photos of themselves before the wedding day. So as you can probably tell, my photography style, at least my goal, is to be timeless and natural. So my philosophy about wedding photos is you obviously want them to look good now, but you also, the second that your wedding is done and gone, those photos are family heirlooms. So 20 years down the line, you want your kids and eventually your grandkids to look at the photos and still like them. So I try to stay away from anything too trendy, too like painfully 2020 or 2000s, or just my goal is to make the photos look timeless and then also natural. One of my favorite compliments that my clients tell me is that they feel like themselves in the photos. They feel like I captured their personalities. I don't want the photos to ever feel like super stiff or rigid or fake or contrived. I always try my best to make the photos look natural as well. So the 5 main ways that I achieve this is I always shoot with prime lenses. I try to use a timeless, true-to-life editing style. I use natural and authentic posing. I try to shoot in clean environments, and I try to always utilize or mimic natural lighting. So prime lenses, I shoot with all prime lenses. I have a wide 24, a sort of medium 50, an 85, and a 135, and then I think a 105 macro. So all prime lenses. Are you guys familiar with why prime lenses are so nice?
Well, give me.
Sure, yeah. So they're a fixed focal length, and they're like good quality glass, just really high quality. And the nicest perk, in my opinion, about them is that you can shoot at a pretty wide maximum aperture. So something like f2.0, f1.8, 1.4, or 1.2. So pretty wide. And the beauty about that is that you can shoot with a shallow depth of field, which is my favorite thing about the lenses. I won't shoot with anything that, I think my macro is 2.8, but everything else is 2.0 or smaller, so that you can get this beautiful shallow depth of field. I feel like if these shots were taken at like f14 or f8 or something where everything was in focus, it wouldn't be as beautiful. When you have a shallow depth of field, it gives the viewer a clear focal point, tells them where to look, what the focal point of the photo is. And when the shot itself is beautiful, you don't need to compensate so much with heavy-handed editing or things like that in post. So of course they're pricier to get the nice prime, pro quality lenses, but it just makes the shots so much more beautiful without having to try hard. And especially if you have something in the foreground or the background, like a veil or like the trees in the background, they just get super blurry and soft and beautiful and ethereal, and it's my favorite thing ever.
Hey Lynn, could I ask you a question on
Yes.
that one right there?
Yes.
So how did you get the veil to curve around like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on wedding days, there's pretty much always these days, 2 of us, so myself and my second shooter. My second shooter, basically, I'm shooting here, my second shooter is holding the veil in front of the lens, and there was like a gust of wind that kind of like floated out like that.
So you have to wait for the wind to get the nice...
Even without the wind, it would just be lower, but yeah, the wind made it a really, really pretty shot. Yeah. Also, you can do it yourself if you're holding the camera. It's a little hard because I think most of us are righties when we're shooting, but you could hold the veil yourself and just have it close to the lens. But yeah, the wind is always really nice. It doesn't take much to make a veil flow in the wind because they're so light, so even like a little breeze does make them flow.
Just have to have a good set of lungs to blow the air across it.
Yeah, you can have your own little fan or something. Same thing with a shot like this. If it was just all in focus, it wouldn't be as visually interesting. So just the fact that it was a really shallow depth of field, your eye immediately goes to the reflection in the mirror. And of course, the farther away the subject is from the background, the even more pronounced that blurry, shallow depth of field becomes. And another perk, but in my opinion, kind of necessity if you're shooting weddings, a reason to have prime lenses is it allows you to shoot in low light situations. So are you all familiar with kind of like the trifecta of the exposure of a photo? It's the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. And then obviously, the natural light or your flash. So those 3 things together determine how bright or dark your photo is. So if you're kind of maxed out at your ISO, you're pretty high, you don't want to go any higher to create grain, you can't go much slower than, at least I personally don't shoot slower than 1/200th of a second, otherwise you get motion blur. So then your last option is aperture. So being able to shoot at, I think on a wedding day, I'm almost always shooting at f2.0, maybe a little less shallow if there's like a group of people. But the beauty about being able to shoot so wide open is that you can shoot in, for instance, a dark prep room, Or churches are often a little more dimly lit, so being able to open up your aperture to let in more light. And then the reception. The reception 9 times out of 10 is a dark room, so being able to shoot, with that wide aperture is basically necessary. So then the second thing I always try to do is edit more or less on the true to life side. So my style is definitely a bit more light and airy, a little bit more vibrant, and a tiny bit warm. But overall, I try to make my photos look more or less true to life. Cleaned up, with a pop, and I would never deliver photos straight from my camera, but the goal is to make it look more or less what it looks like in real life. So my kind of main formula when I edit is I bump up the shadows. I like things, not any super like dark black holes or dark spots. I like everything really light and bright. Maybe bring down the highlights a little if it gets blown out, but overall just bump up the lightness, bump up the shadows, and that's basically it. I don't do anything too much to alter the colors in the photos. The one thing I do usually tweak, since we're here on the East Coast, in the Hudson Valley, there's lots of grass, trees, mountains, lots of greenery. Sometimes the greens translate on camera pretty vibrant, almost neon. So the one thing I usually always do is just bump down the vibrance of the green. And then I like my style a little more warm. So I'll bump down the greens a little bit and then add a little bit of warmth. But other than that, I don't do too much to add too much color or change the integrity of what the scene actually looked like.
Do you spend a lot of time editing then? It doesn't sound like it.
I do. It's kind of ironic. It's kind of like what's it called? Like you try really hard to make it look like you didn't try hard. That's the bulk. If it's a 10-hour wedding day, it takes me like 2 weeks of solid in front of the computer working to edit it. So every single picture I shoot, I edit. First I cull, so I download everything and then only pick out the best of the best, and then I edit those. So every single photo gets looked at. Of course I batch, like if it's the same scene as much as possible. So it does take the same amount of time as like being heavy-handed, but the point is just to not, it's to make it look like it's the best version of real life. So everything still gets edited and does take time. I wish I could just, upload and deliver, but yeah.
How many images are you starting with?
So let's see, like a 10-hour wedding day, I don't know my numbers recently, but probably like 4,000 photos taken on the wedding day. Download them all. I'm pretty quick and ruthless.
That's almost 1 a minute.
Oh, I would say it's probably even more. It's probably more than 1 a minute, but then some lag time of not shooting. But yeah, it's quite a lot. But then I'm really quick and ruthless when I'm culling. I try not to be too precious about it. I'm just pick the best of the best. And then I probably narrow down to 1,000, and I probably deliver 800 to 1,000 photos.
And those 800 to 1,000 are all edited?
All edited, yep. Yeah. Yep.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Like I said, a lot of it's batched, so you run the same edits on all the photos and then you go back and tweak. But yeah, that's part of why it takes a while.
Yeah, I'm like that too. I'm
Yeah.
so glad.
Yeah. Yep.
Other people do that.
Yeah, I think that's normal. That's at least what I hear in the industry is a lot of brides and grooms don't understand you just shot my wedding, where are my photos? Where are my photos? It takes a long time to go through them properly, process them, edit them, And then I also try my best to use natural and authentic posing. So like I said before, most couples don't have any experience being in front of the camera. So I would never just drop them in front of the camera and tell them, do your thing, unless they're models, but that rarely ever happens. So I do situate them, so I'll tell them where to stand or sit or, a general instruction. But then my favorite thing is to try to just get their natural personalities, their natural interactions out of them. So kind of tell them to talk to each other or walk a little bit or just have a moment. And then if I see something I need to tweak, I'll tell them, oh, put your hand a little higher, lower, or there, or whatever. But my goal is never to just situate them like robots. I like to try to make it feel like themselves. And in general, when in doubt, I just keep it simple. They're not models that need to show off a certain thing or get a certain thing across for advertising purposes. You just want to capture them being happy, being in love on their wedding day. So when in doubt, just keep it simple. You just want a pose that makes them look beautiful and happy and in love.
All these shots around here in the Hudson Valley?
Not all of them. So this one was the Grandview. That's sort of near here. So I started my business started in South Jersey by the Jersey Shore. Then I went to school in North Jersey. Then I lived in Peekskill, and now I live up here. So my network has kind of gradually gone more north. But I shoot anywhere all over Like a typical wedding would be like an hour and a half drive for me in any given direction. So they're all over.
That's where you first started.
Which one? These ones or?
Oh, where you first started your.
Oh, where I first started? Jersey Shore, Ocean Township. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. But for weddings, I feel like if you're more of a portrait photographer, people definitely look local. But when you're looking for a wedding vendor, people aren't necessarily looking for like right nearby them. They're looking, you know, within a general, you know, region. So a lot of my business is also word of mouth, and like, you know, your friends and family aren't right near you. So the area I work is pretty wide these days. But it also keeps it interesting. I'm not working at the same venues over and over. I drive all over. This one was in the Hamptons, so that was quite a drive. So then another thing that I try really hard to do is keep my environments clean. So I'm a very type A personality just in my own life, which is both a blessing and a curse. But for my clients, it's a really good thing, because on the wedding day itself, before I, you know, situate a client, I'll look around the room, try to find like the cleanest segment of the room. And if there's clutter, I'll either clean that up or make sure it's behind the camera. Just so that the focus of the shot is on the client or whatever I'm photographing. Your eye shouldn't be drawn to eyesores or distractions or clutter or anything like that. And occasionally, if there's something like an exit sign or the day was too busy, we couldn't clean things up, I will go in and Photoshop it after the fact. And that's also why editing sometimes takes longer. I'm very nitpicky about like little distractions and eyesores. But I think it makes a big difference in the photos, because your eye just truly goes to what the photo is all about, not about all the other clutter. And a general rule of thumb I use when trying to pick a background or location for a certain shot is boring is always better than busy. So even if there isn't like a visually interesting or beautiful background, I'm not so concerned about that, because what the photo is really about is the subject. So like the bride or the groom or the bridal party or the family or whatever I'm photographing. So if it's boring, that's actually not a big deal to me. I would much prefer that to a busy, distracting, cluttered background. And whenever possible, if I see it, I try to use existing objects in the photo to kind of act like a frame. So for instance, in this photo, kind of using the trunk and the leaves to act as like a frame within the frame. Or like this, like the bridge kind of visually frames the girls. Or like the doorway kind of frames the couple. So I always try to use my environment to my benefit whenever I can. And then the last thing I always try to do is either utilize or mimic natural light. So whenever possible, I always love shooting outdoors in natural light. Always my favorite. My favorite time of day to shoot is golden hour, so the hour before the sun sets, when the light is the warmest, the lowest, kind of soft. It's just my absolute favorite light to shoot in. But even if it's, let's say, like noon, broad daylight, super sunny day, not a cloud in the sky, I'll try my best to put the couple in shade, in a shadow of something, like there's an overhang, just somewhere to get them out of the direct sun, so that the light is a little more diffused, so there's not like direct light on them, casting harsh shadows, making them squint, making them sweat. And if I really can't find any shade and they have to just be out in the sun, I try to have them facing their shadow directly, so that the sun is completely directly behind them, so those bright spots are kind of eclipsed on the back of their body, so you don't really see it in the photo as much.
So when you shoot like that outside,
Yeah.
are you exposing for their faces and just letting all the bright spot, like the sky?
Yes, yeah, yep, so I'm usually, I'd be exposing for the couple, maybe like a notch or two, just to give margin of error, and then bringing back the highlights in Photoshop afterwards. But even if the background is blown out, like I said, I don't care as much about the background as I care about the couple. So yeah, I'd almost always expose for the couple. Maybe with like a notch down, just to not blow out my highlights too much. And then I'll bring up the shadows later. Yeah. And if I am shooting indoors, I try to bring the subject closer to the window, so at least the natural light is casting on them. And I always, if at all possible, try to turn off the room lights so you don't get that mixing of the yellowy light and then like the blue natural light. But obviously, at least 4 hours of the day during the reception, it's dark lighting. So if I have to use flash, my goal is always to make the flash look as much like natural light as possible. So whenever I use flash on my camera, instead of just having it pointed directly at the couple, this is a little harsh, first of all, on their eyes, but also just creates like a really harsh, undiffused light. So instead of that, I would swing the flash down 45 degrees and then to the side 45 degrees. That way when I'm shooting, so this is if I'm shooting horizontal. If I'm shooting vertical, I would do the same sort of thing this way, so that basically the light gets cast over my shoulder and then bounces off the ceiling and back on the subject that way. So if you're the subject, the light is hitting you at a 45-degree angle, which is like Rembrandt lighting. If any of you guys know art history, he was a painter and he always liked his light source coming from the side. It's just a super flattering direction for the light to come. And since it's being bounced off the ceiling and I'm using a wide aperture, first of all, you retain that ambient light, like the glow of the room in the background, so it's not just like a black hole behind them. And because it's been bounced off the ceiling, it's super soft. Like if you try to look for the shadows, of course there are shadows there, but they're very soft. They're not like harsh shadows. So that's my absolute favorite way to shoot if I have to use flash, which I almost always have to for receptions because they're, dimly lit. So as you can see here, you can still see the background lights of the room with the DJ lights, all of that, but the subject has that beautiful soft fill light on them, and it's coming from a super flattering angle.
Lynn, so if you move around the room, are
Yes.
you repositioning the flash?
No, that's also the beauty about it, which I don't love so much about off-camera flash. There's a couple things, many things actually, I personally don't like about off-camera flash. If you're not familiar, a lot of wedding photographers like to use off-camera flash where they have one of these speed lights set up on a stand around the room, but usually those are pointed, head on directly into the room, and then you get bright pops of light that aren't as diffused as if you're bouncing off the ceiling. So that's one thing I don't like about it, the harshness of it. Number two, I have curly hair, and people with curly hair know that backlighting on curly hair just makes all the frizz become super noticeable, and aesthetically, it's not flattering, and your job as a photographer is to make your clients look flattering, so don't like it for that reason. And number three is if you're moving around the room, where you are and where your subject is constantly moving. So if I have this, my camera is always on me, the same distance from me at all times, and the ceiling is always the same distance from me wherever I go. So as long as the subject is roughly, whatever distance I'm shooting at away. So if it's like dance floor distance, it's like, what is that, 10 feet or something? So it's consistent. It's very consistent because it's always going off the ceiling. If, for instance, I go from like maybe a cocktail hour room where the ceiling's lower to a ballroom where it's high, then I'll adjust. I'll adjust the power of the flash. But other than that, it's super consistent within the same room.
Wow.
Yeah.
What ISO are you shooting?
So my favorite sweet spot combination is 3200 ISO. So this only works if you have like a decent camera that can shoot at high ISOs. So usually my favorite formula is 3200 ISO, 1/200th shutter speed, f2 aperture, and then flash manually, usually on 1/32 or 1/16 of the power. And then I'll adjust if the ceiling's high or lower or whatever. And if it's a dark ceiling, most people think, oh, you can't do that if it's a dark colored ceiling. You still can. You just need to bump up the power because it'll reflect less light. It doesn't really work if there's like a painted ceiling. I went to one venue where they had like a bright blue ceiling, which just made the light like blue because the light caught that color. You can adjust it in your white balance, or you would do something different, which I'll show in a second. So so also I use the same method even earlier in the day. If the prep room is too dark, I can't rely on natural light. I'll do the same thing with my flash. As you can see, the shadows are just super flattering, nice and soft. Same thing for ceremonies. If it's an indoor ceremony in like a darker room, I have to use flash. I use the same method. But if I'm shooting a ceremony, usually my lenses are a bit longer. So again, I'll just manually make the power brighter because it has like a farther distance to travel, if that makes sense. But if there is no ceiling, or the ceiling won't work, or just if it's a rooftop wedding, or if it's a sparkler exit or something where there's no ceiling, I use this little attachment called a mag mod. So the mag mod is just this like magnetic system that they came up with for diffusers you can put on your flash. This is called the mag sphere. It's basically just like a rubber diffuser, and it magnetically pops on and off. And then I would use that to shoot directly at the couple. So yeah, it's a little bit flattening. It doesn't give that beautiful dimensionality, but at least it's super diffused because of the attachment. So again, it flattens them a little bit, but it's still nice and soft, as smooth as possible. I don't like harsh bare light. I like it to be diffused whenever possible. And again, everything I do, I'm always using it in combination with shallow depth of field and a pretty high ISO because I like to get that ambient light in as well.
So those
Yeah.
last two are all with the Magmod.
Yep, all of these. So this is with Magmod. That's Magmod. This, I think it was like a patio where I was still like there was a ceiling above me, so I think that was enough to go on them. But these ones were Magmod. Yeah, Magmod. Yep.
Couldn't tell.
Yep. Any questions about anything at all? Weddings or cameras, lenses, photography?
I completely understand your rationale for preferring the prime lenses.
Yeah.
But in the context of receptions and action situations,
Yeah.
do you ever feel you get caught with the wrong lens on the camera at a given moment?
So I would say that is the one downside to prime and why some people don't prefer it. So first of all, I always have two cameras on me. I have like a dual holster. I always have two. And I have different focal lengths on both cameras. So that kind of gives me that just in case like margin of error. I generally have one a little wider, one a little longer. In the beginning, I was scared of that, but I don't really run into that so much anymore just because I'm so used to the flow of a wedding day. So I know if I'm indoors, I'm 24 and 50. You really can't go wrong. If you have a group shot, 24 millimeters is perfect. If you want pretty details and portraits, 50 is perfect. For ceremonies, almost everything is pretty far away because you want to stay out of the way. You want to be right up in their face. So ceremony would be maybe 50 to be safe and on the wide side, and then a 135 to get those super close. So basically, I have like a mental rhythm of I know what the room looks like, what I'm shooting, and what focal length I'll need. So
you're saying experience is valuable.
it is, yeah, yep.
And just one other procedural question.
Yeah.
When you come home with 4,000 images,
Yeah.
Do you use Lightroom to do your initial edits?
So to cull, I always use Bridge. And to edit, so this also is showing my age, showing when I started. I started out when there was no such thing as Lightroom, no such thing as any of that. It was Photoshop and you edited every single one individually. Thankfully, I wasn't doing so many weddings back then. But so I use Bridge to cull. A lot of people like Photo Mechanic. I think you have to pay, I don't know if it's a monthly or a one-time fee. I haven't tried it, so I can't swear by it, but I love Bridge. Super fast. It loads the previews fast enough for my purposes. I literally just go through ruthlessly and go next, next, next. And if I like it, I just give it a 1 star so that at the very end, if it's a 1 star, I move it over to edit. If it's 0 stars, I'll usually keep them just in case someone comes back and says, do you have a picture of Aunt so-and-so? She was, just little things like that. But yeah, I just ruthlessly go through and pick. And then I edit in Camera Raw through Bridge. So it's basically like Lightroom. The interface is just a little bit different, but it's essentially the same as Lightroom. It's a little more simplified, so there's not the different processes as Lightroom has, but it's essentially the same. The sliders are all the same. I just find that's what I grew up using, so that's what I'm fastest in, but it's essentially the same. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah.
When you're outdoors, are you using shutter priority, aperture priority, or manual?
I usually always use manual. Yeah. I kind of have a rhythm too. Like I know, it's really bright. I know mentally that's 100 ISO. I have a rhythm. I'm constantly tinkering. I'm a totally manual girl.
Let's go into post-process. You said 4,000 images?
Yeah.
Do you have your cameras all synced together?
Yes. So before.
So then you sort them by time?
Yes, by date created. So it gets a little bit hairy because I have a second shooter almost all the time. So on the wedding day, we always make sure to sync our time. So the date in the camera to the exact second. We're very nitpicky about it. You can fix it later, but it's just wasted time that you don't need to be wasting. So we always do that on the day of the wedding. I'll usually tell them beforehand, if we're starting at different locations, we'll both set up to the same website, so time.gov. We use that same universal website for that time.
You got quite a bit of education background in terms of things that you have. Such as guessing, photography, art, fashion. Any particular one that you think is more emphasis to the job that you're doing today, or is it something you've kind of grown all those things and played them all together? And this is how you created your business, your opportunity here to take the wedding shots. Is that how you kind of set it up, or?
That's a great question. So like I said, I went to school for photography. I actually majored in photography. I would say if there was, there's a couple. But okay, so my short answer is experience. If you could only do one thing, experience. Just getting out there, doing, seeing things go wrong, seeing things go right, just repetition, iteration. Experience is the best possible thing ever. Second choice, I would say, honestly, my business minor was the best, in terms of education. Photography, of course you can teach it. You can teach the technical aspect, but you can't really teach the art side of it or the doing or like, you know, the problem solving and the art side. It's really hard to teach art. So if you could only go to school for one thing, I would go to school for business because that's the stuff that you can really learn. Like, okay, taxes, what's it called? Management, managing your second shooters. All of that stuff is more easy to learn in a school setting. The rest, I would say internships, just getting out there and shooting, assisting, shadowing, just experience however you can get it has been the best. Yep.
Where'd you go to school for photography?
I went to Montclair State University.
Where?
Montclair State University, North Jersey. What's that county? It's in Montclair. That's the name of the town. Yeah. Yeah. It was, what was nice for me is it was, I think, like 14 miles from New York City. It was like either the bus or the train right over. So that's why I was able to take those internships while I was still in school. So it was, the proximity to the city was really good. And they had a great art program. I would say their photography program wasn't so much commercial photography, like photography as a business. It was more fine art. So it wasn't actually very relevant to what I'm doing these days, but I did learn a lot of things like composition, art theory, all of that stuff that I use kind of in a backhand kind of way.
What are you shooting with?
So very recently I just switched over. So I previously, for the past many years, shot with two Nikon D750s, so full frame cameras. And I just recently fully switched over to the Nikon Z6 IIs, so the mirrorless full frame cameras. Yeah, they're pretty similar. A couple little things I have to like retrain my mind of like where the buttons are and the little things, but pretty similar, but I really, really like the mirrorless. They're slightly lighter and the click is a little bit quieter. The back screen is super easy to use. Yeah, a lot of little perks. And that's like the way of the future. So eventually you have to switch over from DSLR to mirrorless. I just decided to dive in. And anytime you switch over a camera system, sometimes the lenses are compatible, sometimes they're not. Unfortunately, the mount, the Z mount, is different than the F mount, but there is an adapter, so I'm kind of gradually transitioning over my lenses too now. So, the struggle.
So when you photograph
Yeah.
couples and
Yeah.
engagements, how long
Yeah.
are those sessions? Like,
Yeah.
the reason I'm asking is,
Yeah.
how long can you keep them engaged
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
before you lose them?
That's a good point, yeah. So engagement sessions are an hour long. That's just kind of like the typical time frame. But sometimes you don't need that full hour. Sometimes you can tell if they're not used to being in front of the camera. Towards the end, they're like, oh my God, like, whew. Like it's tough being in front of the camera, especially if you're not used to it and you're kind of nervous. On a wedding day, it's usually a little more like staggered. You'll do pictures in the morning and then transition, and then it's not so much all in one go. So, I mean, obviously for the couple, I'm sure the wedding day is still exhausting being in front of the camera all day, but it's a little more broken up. Engagement sessions, I know some people do an hour and a half engagement sessions. I think that's a little too long. I think 1 hour is perfect. Yeah. And that gives you enough time. Like, let's say you're at a park, you can go to lots of different locations, switch it up. Yeah.
And how many photos would you deliver for that type of a session?
That's a good question. Probably anywhere from like 100 to 200, maybe 250. Yeah, so a bit less, quite a bit less. And there's not a second shooter either on engagement session, so it's a bit less.
When you do the outside sessions with an engagement thing,
Yeah.
do you have predetermined site that you like to go to, or the couple picks your site? How do you do it
Yeah,
there?
so usually they are welcome to pick. So some people have like a location in mind, whether it's like a sentimental location, either like a park near them that they love, or like the beach they got engaged on, or just somewhere pretty they've always had in their mind. Sometimes they have no preference at all. They say, you pick, just somewhere nice. Usually what they'll do is tell me like the vibe they're going for, so like beach or mountain views or stone wall. Like they'll give me whatever, like boho, fields. They'll just shout out the vibe they're going for, and then I'll suggest a couple and they'll pick one. Yeah, so it's kind of a mix. But they are fully allowed to pick wherever they want. And unfortunately, some parks, usually like the public parks, you sometimes need a permit to shoot in them. It's very mixed depending on the park. If they're very strict, it can be a really strict process to get the permit, and it can be expensive, like a couple hundred. Usually they're nice and it's like no fee or anything. But if it's a popular place and they kind of have to crack down, they will usually, you have to apply for a permit and charge you $100, $200, sometimes like $500 for a permit. But I would bill that to the client, so I would let them know, hey, they require a permit. Do you still want to do it or not?
Do you have difficulty in keeping the extraneous people out of the shop?
Yeah, sometimes. If it's something like Central Park where it's like super crowded, it is tricky. Yeah, I just try to pick my angle and then like snap, 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 and hopefully one of them, there's no one in the background, or try to situate them somewhere I know it'll be easy to Photoshop them out later. Or it's not pleasant, but if you know that they want like a really popular touristy attraction, doing a sunrise session is a good little hack. I'm not a morning person, so it can be painful, but the lighting is basically the same as golden hour. Not as soft, but it's still got that soft golden glow, and there's usually no one around depending on the season and what time sunrise is. So that's a little hack I use if someone wants somewhere like really popular and they want no one in the background.
I didn't notice in your presentation any group type photographs other than the bridal party itself.
Yeah.
Referring to the obligatory mom and dad family.
Yes.
How do you handle that?
So leading up to the wedding day, I send a couple of questionnaire about like a month before the wedding. So it's on my website. It's like a form you'd fill out. And one of the questions is family shot list. So I don't ask for a family shot list.
Yep.
So I'll ask them to kind of bullet point the groupings they want. I don't ask for a general shot list of like shoes, me smiling at my future husband. Like I don't ask for that. That would be crazy. But for no, I try very hard to. I don't really get those at all anymore. In the very beginning, some couples did that, but the only thing I ask for is a family shot list, because then on your wedding day, there's so many things on your mind. The last thing they, need to be thinking about is, did I get the permutation with aunt and uncle and, so they just send us the shots they want. And then also we can see if it's a really huge list, we can tell them, do you really, really, really want all these combinations? Or if you really do, fine, but we need to allocate more time for it. Or at least we have that list, we can print it out, we can call out the names, we know what groupings, and we can check them off as we go. Yeah.
Are you having trouble finding a wedding photographer?
Yeah, so that was one of the hardest things ever. So I've been in this industry for 11 years. I know a million photographers. Honestly, the method we went with was, okay, who's the most similar to me in terms of shooting style, editing, appearance of, everything. And once I had a good fit, it seemed like, okay, that's a good option. I just chose, and that was it. Like, we didn't even talk with anyone else because we could have done that for ages. So we picked something we felt good about. We had a great gut feeling. We just closed the door. That was it. Yeah. It's weird being a bride now.
I would imagine so.
Yeah.